this story here. So, the National Post stating liberals want to nearly double CBC funding as an investment in national security. Come again? Hey, I enjoy, some of the programming on there, but I didn't think my life and my security of this nation revolved around Jerry D hosting the Canadian version of Family Feud. As an investment of national security. Okay. Okay. Now, why exactly is it considered a national security threat? Well, maybe it came around when Pierre Polyev said this.
We have to cut waste and mismanagement in this country. After 10 years of the Carney-Trudeau Liberals, they've increased government spending by 80%. They've increased the debt by over 100%. And much of it has gone to waste. For example, almost nobody watches CBC television. They have among the worst ratings of any network. And yet, Trudeau gives them billions more. We're going to cut wasteful spending. Not just there, but across the government to bring down inflation, deficits, and taxes.
Wow. Seeming more and more like the Donald Trump Doge. I don't think you want to give the liberals that kind of bait because they already view Pierre Polyev as some sort of Donald Trump adjacent person. And now to say that, oh, we're going to cut government spending, which is something that, hey, most people do when they're in financial situations. They cut back on waste. They examine their financial assets. They examine what they're wasting money on, what's resourceful and what isn't. That's just basic accounting, ladies and gentlemen, has become such a polarizing topic. And now to the point that having money slushed to the CBC is considered a national security interest, according to the Liberal Party. So, the Toronto Star states Trudeau government proposes new CBC mandate that includes big funding boost, a ban on some advertisements. In her announcement, Canada's Heritage Minister took aim at both Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and U.S. President Donald Trump over the former promises to defund the public broadcaster and the latter's threats to annex the country it serves. That really why she's mandating the CBC? Well, let's find out. Federal Heritage Minister Pascal St-Onge has proposed a series of sweeping changes to revamp CBC Radio Canada at a time, the minister said, when the public broadcaster must navigate misinformation, partisan attacks, and threats to Canada's independence. So it's not anything to do with, protecting the jobs at CBC, giving quality programming. Oh, no, none of that's ever the case. That's already out the window. But no, it's protecting, navigating misinformation, partisan attacks, and threats to Canada's independence. I think that ship has already sailed. I think that ship is far beyond sailed. And the CBC being the arbiters of misinformation because they are directly colluded with the Trudeau government to push some ridiculous schemes like the lies on COVID, the lies of Ukraine war, the lies of Russiagate, the lies of everything the CBC has told you. And we have exposed on channels like this and other Canadian outlets that are not part of the establishment media conglomeracy. The proposal include a major funding boost, changes in how that money is approved, banning advertising on some fronts of content, and ending the government's practice of appointing the broadcaster CEO. Whether the recommendations will actually be implemented is not clear, with both a Liberal leadership vote and a federal election in the offing. St-Onge framed the overhaul as a apolitical move meant to ensure that CBC belongs to the Canadian people rather than the Liberals, Conservatives, or anybody else. But she put both Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and U.S. President Donald Trump in her crosshairs over the former's longtime promises to defund the public broadcaster and the latter's threats to annex the country it serves. Here, Polyev doesn't know what it means to put Canada first, or else he would choose to protect a Canadian institution that belongs to Canadians and exists for Canadians. CBC Radio Canada will never belong to billionaire tech oligarchs like Musk or Zuckerberg, st-Onge said on a Thursday news conference, where she also announced that she would not be seeking re-election in the coming federal campaign. So, as she's walking out the door, she's making favorable promises to the CBC. Could be that she'll just jump ship from the government over to some sort of, administration role at the CBC. Just saying. I think we need to envision the investments that we're making in our public broadcaster as a national security issue. I don't know what's laughable, the national security issue that CBC presents itself, or the fact that they're still self-describing themselves as a public broadcaster. Because I have stated, and I'm going to show you later on, how that is not the case. We know that our sovereignty is, more than ever, an issue that Canadians are preoccupied about, she added. We know that we're being asked to invest more in our national defense and our borders, but protecting Canadian sovereignty also implies investing in our means of communication and being able to resist a foreign influence. And sadly, the CBC has not actually pointed out why our sovereignty is in threat. They just say that Donald Trump is to blame for everything and Justin Trudeau is the savior. I guess that's what $600 million does to a public broadcaster. st-Onge's plan comes after she launched a process last year to begin modernizing CBC's mandate. Part of the process includes striking an advisory committee to advise the minister on how the broadcaster's mandate should be updated. That panel included Marie Philippe Bouchard, who at the time was CEO of TV5 Quebec, Canada, but debuted as CBC's president and CEO last month. Bouchard inherited the role from Catherine Tate, yeah, that is her name, who previously came under fire, particularly from MPs, about executives' pay as the broadcaster grappled with job cuts. I don't think it's just the MPs. I'm pretty sure it's the people that got laid off, told that they were there wasn't money for the CBC, but yet got this government subsidy that they paid the executives as they laid off the bottom half of the rest of the broadcasting network. st-Onge says roles like Bouchard's should no longer be appointed by the government, rather than be chosen solely by the broadcaster's board of directors. The board, which would also determine the CEO's salary, taking in consideration similar positions in the public service. Such a move would be more in line with many countries in Europe and other jurisdictions, and would remove any perception that the CEO is being influenced by the government of the day, the minister said. Okay, so that seems kind of fair when you see that, but there's more to this. That change would have been made by updating Canada's Broadcasting Act, as many of the other changes st-Onge put forward Thursday. One of the largest is adding a provision to the law that would change how CBC's funding is granted. At present, it receives government funding through a parliamentary appropriations, meaning funding is proposed and voted on by the parliamentarians through the regular budgetary process. st-Onge's proposal would see that shift to be a statutory appropriation based on a funding formula keyed to population levels. That means Heritage Canada said that the funding would be enshrined in law instead of being set by whoever is in power. That's where the conflict of interest is, ladies and gentlemen, that it is going to be inscribed in law that the CBC is going to get an extraordinary amount of funding. Now, granted of what people's opinions on the CBC, whether they enjoy it or dislike it or what have you, this is taking a bridge way too far. That they have to enshrine this into law. They have to mandate it because they know that someone like Pierre Polyev, who is more likely going to win the next election coming up, is going to critique the CBC, is going to investigate, is going to cook the books, and cut back on the wasteful spending to this broadcaster. And people like Catherine Tang, people that enrich themselves within the public broadcaster, don't want to see that disappear. They don't want the books to be open, even though this is supposed to be a public broadcaster. The minister noted Thursday that Canada's per capita funding of its public broadcaster falls well below that of its G7 counterpart. CBC's per capita funding is approximately $33.66 compared to the G7 average of 62.20. St-Onge's proposal of a gradual transition to a higher amount, more in line with other G7 members, but did not cite an exact figure. The minister's office told the Star the increase would necessarily fall to taxpayers based on how future governments decide to allocate funds from the public's treasury. So, what does that exactly mean? Are they going to print more money to the CBC, causing more of an inflation? How exactly is that? If it's not coming from taxpayers, and yet you want governments to still fund this public broadcaster, how is that money going to be reached? How is that money going to be brought to the CBC? It just doesn't make any sense to this. CBC received about $1.4 billion in government funding in 2024 and also relies on other commercial sources of revenue like advertising and subscriptions to support its programming. So this is, and I highlighted these two because this is why the CBC self-describing themselves as a public broadcaster is kind of a bit of a lie. Because if it truly was a public broadcaster, and the same can go for a lot of different broadcasters that claim themselves to be public, just like how PBS in the United States, yeah, they claim themselves to be a public broadcaster for the people and raised money by the people. But there's also a conflict of interest when that involves corporations donating, when it's Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation co-opting themselves, donating to these public institutions that allocate themselves to promote their agenda, to promote the Bill and Melinda Gates Health Foundations, to promote Gavi, to promote the vaccine schedule. That's what we saw with NPR. That's what we saw with PBS. That's the thing we're seeing with the CBC. So to claim that it's a public broadcaster, but yet get sources of income from the government and the private corporations, that's not really a public broadcaster. And if it's getting a lucrative amount of money from advertisers, from corporations, how is it still getting funding from the government and claiming itself a public broadcaster? That's one of the things that Pierre Polyev would probably address to that. Is probably going to bring up. You're paying $1.4 billion to the CBC. It's not doing well in ratings. It's not really promoting anything really remotely Canadian other than the Canadianized propaganda arm of the government, and also gets funding from commercial advertisers. But there's more to this story because, as you know, CBC paid out $18.4 million in bonuses in 2024 after it eliminated hundreds of jobs. This is back in August of 2024. So when they got bailed out, when they got that government subsidy, that money was supposed to go towards the employees at CBC. They got axed down. They went right to the CEOs. And that's where Catherine Taint, that is her name, was held to account by Parliament, by the Judiciary Committee, and they investigated the fact that Catherine Taint took that money that was supposed to go towards the network employees at a time that the media landscape was failing, and she took it for her own. The bonuses went to nearly 1,200 employees. 3.3 million went to 45 executives, according to their own broadcast. According to the CBC themselves, they couldn't even hide it. So Braden Leslie points out Trudeau's CEO at the CBC, Catherine Tate, that is her name, says she will not be accused of abusing tax dollars. What arrogance! They billed you $1,000 per night for a luxury hotel so she could go vacation in Paris during the Olympics. It wasn't even a work situation. She did it for vacation purposes. $1,000 a night of taxpayer dollars to flourish herself. Not to make the CBC programming any better. Not to go towards the cameramen and the PAs and the operators. No. $1,000 a night for her. Worse, CBC paid out a staggering $18.4 million in bonuses this year, including $3.3 million to top 45 executives after cutting 800 jobs. Now Tate refuses to rule out accepting future compensation from Trudeau's government. It's time to defund the CBC. So she's now out. But because she's out, they're not holding her accountable. Even though she violated agreements about where that money was going towards and corrupted herself to take that money for her own enrichment. So she could stay at luxury hotels. So she could screw over the other employees at CBC to enrich herself. Here's Franco Terrazzano, who is the head of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. It's the closest thing we're getting to Doge at this point. They're really, really hammering the books on this. CBC handed out $16 million in bonuses last year, $99 million in bonuses since 2015. The CBC CEO Catherine Tate annual compensation is $473,000 or $624,000. Will Tate end the bonuses, including her own? I'd say the answer is no. And now that she's out without a trace, she's no longer the CEO of CBC. She's never going to be held to account. Because now she's gone. I don't have to investigate anymore. Now there's a new sheriff in town. But is that going to stop the corruption? Is that going to make CBC more efficient and actually better as a broadcaster? Probably not. Probably not. Here's Rebel News saying Heritage Minister Pascal St-Onge says the Liberals want to enrich the law in the role that CBC Radio Canada plays in the fight against disinformation to support the public, especially in the current context. Yeah, don't get this idea that you can actually look up things and actually understand that the CBC has lied to you in various areas. We already showed different aspects from COVID, from Ukraine, to all the different areas, including Trump, that they notoriously lied to you in front of your face. And yet they're still begging for more money to be bailed out from a dying broadcaster because the general public is disgusted by how the CBC mismanages and misinforms the general public. And it's sad because once upon a time, the CBC, back when, Peter Mansbridge was in the helm of the chief anchor chair, was actually a reputable source. Now it's a joke. It's an utter joke. And they have to protect that joke because disinformation. Because God forbid, podcasters like myself could just say anything. And that's why we need a state official media to counteract that and try to silence out other competitors. Listen.
Enshrined in the law, enshrine in law the role that CBC Radio-Canada plays in the fight against disinformation to support the public, especially in the current context. And this refers directly to some of the recommendations that were made by the Foreign Interference Commission, which repeated how important it is that Canadians can rely on Canadian sources of information to be more resilient and to understand the patterns that other countries use to disseminate propaganda or disinformation to influence how we live together and our political context.
Again, note that the funding that goes to CBC does not go towards better programming. It doesn't go towards the employees that run the network. It doesn't go to the camera operators. It went to the top CEOs. They slashed the workforce, and their journalistic ethics are completely atrocious that they deliberately lied to your face. And in order to protect this dying legacy media brand that is doing it to themselves, they have to entrench the law to force the CBC to get its money from the government, no matter what cost. The same way that they put the censorship tactics on podcasters and independent media through Bill C-11, Bill C-18, Bill C-63. Because they don't want competitors, they don't want people, outsiders, that have these platforms to be able to speak about Canadian issues, to promote content made by Canadians for Canadians, to understand how Canada is operating. They rather you listen to the mouthpiece garbage of the Trudeau establishment, the propaganda arm of the Trudeau establishment. Why is that the case? Because they got $600 million off the government. Did that go towards upgrading their program schedule? No. Of course not. But because of that, because of all the bailouts, because of all the subsidies, they're gonna touch Trudeau with kid gloves. They're not gonna hold him accountable. They're not gonna hold the establishment accountable. They're not gonna hold someone like Mark Carney accountable. They're the ones promoting him.
And this is why I propose to anchor in CBC Radio-Canada's mandate its role in helping the Canadian population fight against disinformation and understand fact-based information.
Fact-based information. As right now, CBC is still continuing to lie to people about the origin of COVID. Still lying to you. They still want you to believe that somehow it came from a wet market and a bat got involved with some other animal and that's how it afflicted into a human. That's not what happened. Investigations have proven, it has been proven, even the CIA has came to conclusion that this was an element man-made by a virology lab in China, in Wuhan, China, and surprisingly from the laboratory that's named after the virus. It was that simple to figure out, folks, but places like the CBC and other outlets want to disguise that and masquerade that if you pointed that out or mentioned about the lab leak or mentioned anything about that you are a conspiracy theorist. Or worse of all, you're spreading Chinese hate, Asian hate, for pointing out a virology lab that was promoted and escalated by our governments. That Anthony Fauci and USAID and Global Affairs Canada and health initiatives in this country help contribute to the creation of the virus. And the CBC continues to lie to you about the origin of that. Why? Because it's conflicting interests of the government that pays them. And why would they bite the hand that feeds them? So, you remember, this is back in 2018, $600 million in federal funding for media, a turning point in the plight of newspapers in Canada. Morneau said the government wants to protect the vital role that independent news media play in our democracy and in our communities. That's what they made you believe. That was the front. That was the little front that they disguise their true intentions with. The same way that C11, the Online Streaming Act, was disguised as a front to say, oh, we're going to help streamers. We're going to help promote Canadian content. But what that turned out to be, it turned out to be a gimmick for censorship that they can go after people that don't promote the correct Canadian agenda. The same way with this. $600 million doesn't go towards production. It went towards buying out the media so they wouldn't cover their party. It wouldn't cover Justin Trudeau. Here's Kanoka the Great pointing out in 2019, Justin Trudeau joked about how his government paying the Canadian media $600 million. We sometimes hear about liberal bias in the media these days. Well, here's what he says.
You sometimes hear about liberal bias in the media these days, how they're constantly letting our government off the hook for no good reason. Frankly, I think that's insulting. It's clear that they let us off the hook for a very good reason, because we paid them $600 million.
That's why. That's why. They want you to believe it was bailing out Canadian media, that they care about the broadcasters and promoting Canadian content. No, it's to take control of the narrative. It is always to take control of the narrative, just like C11, just like C18, just like C63. All these bills that they lied to you, they manipulate you, they propagandize you to think that's helping you. That's helping the fight against disinformation or fighting hate speech or anything of the above. The true intentions is to gain control over the narrative. That's why they gave $600 million to all the broadcasters in Canada. And notice how all the broadcasters in Canada completely shut out and silence themselves about discussing Trudeau. That we didn't hear more about the SNC-Lavalin scandal. That we don't hear any more about the We Day scandal. They wanted to completely memory hold that. Why? Because they got $600 million. That's why. Because the Prime Minister directly said it to a room full of people. Hey, that's why we got off the hook, because we paid them. And you thought I cared a damn or two about promoting Canadian content. Ha! So, even though there is some outlets, even though there are some outlets that want you to think otherwise, including Reuters, Thomson Reuters, who Chrystia Freeland used to work for, by the way. Chrystia Freeland used to be a journalist at Thomson Reuters. Just to show you what kind of an organization it is. Kanoka the Great says, although Reuters fact-checked this clip, the clip you just saw there, and argued it was out of context because Trudeau displayed some media headlines that were not in favor of him afterward, they failed to address the main point. The Canadian government paid the media $600 million. Of what? Your tax dollars. They bailed out the media to promote their agenda. Not because they give a damn about the broadcasters. Not because they gave a damn about the people that work in that industry. Because whether it be in CBC or even Bell Media, they gave all the money to the top CEOs, and the top CEOs took it and ran. And I know people that work at the CBC, that work at Bell Media, they got shunned out. They got laid off. They got fired. Even after they got this huge settlement, they got this huge subsidy from the Canadian government that was supposed to bail out the media at a critical time because the legacy empire is dying. So we got to bail out and lush out so much money. The CEOs took it and run, leaving the people that run your news, the TV shows, the talk shows, the everyday people, 9 to 5, whatever times they clock in and clock out, that run these broadcasters, got shunned out. It was a scam from the get-go. It's still a scam now. And that is why Pierre Poilievre, we don't know if he's serious of defunding CBC, as they want you to believe, as they want to fearmonger that campaign, but definitely needs to open the books. We definitely need to investigate. And almost to a point of a Doge situation on this public broadcaster. And again, I use that in air quotes because the public broadcaster gets money from the government and private corporations. So how is that exactly a public broadcaster? Whereas someone like me, for example, doing this show relies solely on you and your contributions. I'm considered a threat, which is why they're censoring me. But the CBC gets bailed out time and time and time and time again, continuously lie and lie and lie, and makes themselves even worse that they're running on nothing. They have no viewers because they lost the respect of those people by the notorious lies that they do. And they still get bailed out from your tax dollars to manipulate, to lie to you, to propagandize you, to manipulate you, to fearmonger you. Because the Justin Trudeau reign has bought a way to control the narrative. And just like North Korea, just like China, like all these other places with their state media that you point the finger and go, oh my God, I can't believe we don't want to be like them. Well, congratulations. We are them. You just have different choices in state media. It's all giving you the same story, all giving you the same exact output. You just have different colors. You have different logos. You have different people. But it's all the same narrative because it's narrative control to manipulate you to stay on course of whatever Justin Trudeau or whatever establishment party wants you to believe.